Every club. Every club. Every day. The Global Sports Podcast Network.
Hello. Welcome, Stuart, to episode 74 of the Daily Premier League Podcast in English. How are you, Stuart? How's your Monday night going?
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you, Eshan, for having me. Very excited to be here, making my debut on the Daily English EPL podcast. Yeah, looking forward to chatting to you about all things Forest and a bit of FA Cup as well.
Yeah, of course. Let's just jump straight into it. Exeter Forest. Is this simply a run-of-the-mill victory, or do we see Exeter actually providing any opposition of substance?
It's an interesting one. I mean, for me, look, Forest are the highest ranked team left in the competition after Liverpool went out on Saturday against Plymouth. So, I mean, I would be disappointed if we don't win quite straightforward. Some Forest fans are saying, are saying concentrate on the league. We've got a Champions League spot, but for me, it's part of being a Champions League team or a Champions League contender is that you can't be losing against League One, against third tier opposition. Yes, we'll make 9-10 changes from our last league game, that now famous 7-0 victory over Brighton. But I mean, we have to, in my eyes, it becomes an important game because we have to show we mean business, and we have to show we've got that strength and depth to easily swat aside a third tier team.
Yeah, I mean I think that's been one of the most interesting things for me from an outside perspective of Forest is how much strength and depth you've had. I know you've had those two massive summer windows from previous years where you spent a lot of money, and yet it's still surprising that a game like this you're going to be able to facilitate in making changes. So I assumed the same. I think it's very run in the mill. Exeter not doing crazy well in League One. They're far down the table. So
Not won since Boxing Day. I heard today. So 26th of
okay.
December. That's probably I think about 10 or so matches ago. So yeah, I know it's always you can never be too confident. Beware the out of form League One team. But yeah, you're right. I think Forest have too much for Exeter. I mean, you mentioned our crazy summer windows of our first two summers back in the Premier League, but this most recent summer we were really measured and really mature. So we only signed really in the summer, I think, two players, and Elliott Anderson and Nikola Milenkovic, and they've really improved our 11, which is what you got to do if you sign so many players. I know there's been lots of jokes perhaps from neutrals such as yourself on how many there really were. But yeah, we've finally had that really calm and measured window. We've added to the 11. And as you say, some of those who are still hanging around from all the previous windows will come in tomorrow night as we record. Today as you guys are listening to this. And we should really, quite comfortably, I'd like to think, swat aside Exeter.
Yeah. Not much more to say about that picture. I'm glad you're on the podcast, but it'd be a much bigger shock to me than Plymouth beating Liverpool is Exeter beating Nottingham Forest the way the Forest are going. So
I mean, yeah, in terms of places in the pyramid, as they say, I mean, we're if there's two league gap instead of just one league gap. Plymouth had already beaten a Premier League opposition in Brentford already this season. So yeah, I think. I mean, yeah, you're right. It's interesting that you're not interested, almost to say it one way, that you as a as a neutral, as a Manchester United fan, don't see it as being anything exciting. If you see Forest hoping to get through them so quickly, so I'll take that as a compliment. I'll take that as a compliment.
Yeah, no, it's Forest have been one of those teams this season, and we'll talk much more about Forest in this podcast, but I'm sure you're aware of that. They've just been so defensively solid every single game I've watched, and I love watching football, and I'm watching most of the games of the weekend. Just watching Forest dismantle teams in such class and ease. I think Milenkovic and Elliott Anderson, your two summer signings, have been some I think specific. Everyone's giving Milenkovic his plaudits, and rightfully so. But I love Elliott Anderson. I think he's a fantastic footballer, and I was moderately surprised that no one was after him, given that he was slightly out of favor in Newcastle. but he's just slotted in
we
perfectly.
really lucked out. I mean, it was a PSR signing, like they say. I mean, we managed to somehow ship our third choice keeper, Odysseus Kodomos, onto Newcastle, and we've got Elliott Anderson for just £15 million when you consider what we made them pay for Vlachodimos. So, steal of the century almost to get Elliott Anderson at that price. It's been strongly rumoured that Forest at the City Ground will host England for the first time in many, many years this summer for a friendly match against Senegal. And we strongly expect to see Elliott Anderson playing for England at the City Ground in that match.
Yeah, he's making a case. I mean, we could touch a little on England and the fact that there's so many like budding young talents coming from so many of these teams. I think Bournemouth is another good example where you're taking like market value wise average players, and they're playing as such a cohesive unit, and the way that some of these players are playing, they're playing themselves into England contention, which is a good problem to have, of course.
Yeah, it really will be interesting to see who's in and Thomas Tuchel's thoughts. He has, of course, managed in England before. He's managed Chelsea. And yeah, I think he had. But if you look at some of the English players he had at Chelsea, we're talking Tammy Abraham, Mason Mount. They're going to be nowhere near the team, of course, unless he goes for a major surprise. So I think unlike Lee Carsley, who picked his favourites from the England under-21s, Thomas Tuchel's going to come in completely with an open mind, with an open book. And yeah, let's see where who is in his first squad. And I think there will be at least one Forest player. Morgan Gibbs-White ahead of Elliott Anderson, but it could well be both of them.
Yeah, Morgan Gibbs-White, fantastic. Touch on Morgan Gibbs-White and Nuno's relationship. So I'm correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure Nuno sold Morgan Gibbs-White to Forest. Is that correct?
Not quite. There's a bit of a gap. So Nuno didn't play Gibbs-White that much at Wolves, so we loaned him out to Swansea and Sheffield United in the Championship. But when he eventually left, it was Bruno Lage, I think is the guy's name, if you remember him at
I remember.
At Wolves, Nuno's successor. But you're right, that was one of the first talking points when Nuno came in, just over a year or so ago now. Because Nuno had barely picked Gibbs-White at Wolves, people thought that would be an issue with him coming in at Forest. But no, Nuno is a very professional, very realistic guy. And he straight away said in one of his first interviews, when I was at Wolves, I had this kid called Morgan Gibbs-White. Now I have this man, Morgan Gibbs-White. So he instantly realised that, yes, they hadn't gotten on. They hadn't had a good working relationship before, and he'd loaned him out or benched him. But he was smart enough to realise and humble enough to realise that Gibbs-White had matured and that he deserved his place in the team. And he's going from strength to strength in the Garibaldi red.
Love it. A couple other points. Nuno, when he came in, what were your thoughts on his initial appointment and towards the back end of the last season when you were dealing with the points deduction? How did you feel about him then?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, when he first came in, so the talk was it was a straight fight between Nuno and Oliver Glasner, who ended up at Crystal Palace for the job. And I was disappointed we ended up with Nuno, just from reputations alone. Of course, Nuno, after failing at Spurs, he'd been off in Saudi, and he even, as Oliver Glasner had, I think, won the Europa League and got Frankfurt and Wolfsburg in Germany to the Champions League. So I would definitely prefer Oliver Glasner. And then as the season progressed last year, Forest never got higher than 17th, whereas Palace rocketed to 12th, 10th, or whatever it was under Glasner. So it certainly did seem last season that although Nuno did just enough to keep us in, it was maybe not the exciting appointment that we would have liked, especially when directly comparing him to Oliver Glasner. But as we said before, this summer, he had his pre-season. He had a really good team bonding camp in Spain, taught the players his methods. They bought into it. And crucially, there's just those two extra additions to strengthen the team. And yeah, he's hit the ground running this season, and now completely in Nuno we trust. I said before that I'd expect 9-10 changes to be made for Exeter game. If for some reason he plays with the full strength team, then sure. he's got his reasons for doing that. Maybe he's worried that they've had too long without a game now. They spent the last week in Dubai. So now I can trust Nuno completely. But yeah, it's a good question. When he first came in, I was disappointed. I wouldn't have chosen Nuno as my dream Forest manager 1 year ago.
Yeah, just like the Forest players in Dubai, we're going to take a little break right now.
This podcast is part of the Global Sports Podcast Network, the only network bringing you exclusive daily news and views on your Premier League team, the Premier League, women's football, and fantasy football. A unique listening experience that puts fans first, bringing you the very latest breaking news from your team. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and make us your first listen every day. The Global Sports Podcast Network. Every club, every day.
Just to touch on now Forest's amazing season so far, what was the result at the start of the season where you began to take notice a little more and take it to heart?
Yeah, it's a good question. So the headline victory earlier in the season was the win at Anfield. Still the only team to beat Arne Slot at Anfield. But that result, I think it was the 6th game of the season. Maybe it was only the 5th. So that was, we weren't dreaming of the Champions League by beating Liverpool because we didn't yet know how good Arne Slot's team would be. And also because it was so early in the season, we could say that's just a fluke result. We got lucky. We beat Liverpool. Maybe Liverpool will lose next week or the week after. So we didn't know at the time how crucial that victory would be because we didn't know how good Liverpool were. So for me, I think the moment when we thought actually we could do something here, it was the Aston Villa win in early December. Because although we'd gotten as high as 3rd a few weeks before, we then lost back-to-back against Arsenal and Man City. For some reason, Forest are the only team who've made Man City look good this year since their bad run started. But the important thing about the Aston Villa victory was that we came from behind to win. I think all of for Forest are well known for taking. I think Forest have scored first in 17 of the 24 matches this season, something like that. It might even be 18 or 19 of the 24. So Villa is the only game we've actually come from behind to win. And not only did that happen, but we went 1-0 down, equalised. That equaliser was ruled out to VAR. And then we came back again, finally got the equaliser in the 90th minute, and then won it in 90+4 or 90+5.
That game was the late kickoff on the Saturday, because I believe I watched that the week after United lost to Forest. That feels, and because I was just like praying on the Forest downfall, as you do as a bitter United fan. So when Duran scored in the second half, I was so sure that this is the moment they crumble. Like I've also given that Aston Villa's credentials to hold leads. They've been typically fantastic about that. Unai Emery coaches the sides very well. But when I was going into those last 10 minutes, you felt the wave of pressure, not just from the fans, but like through the Villa players, which I don't think happens very often. It was very interesting to see, like, especially after the disallowed equalizer. That's the exact like pop a balloon moment that.
Definitely, yeah.
Like exactly, like
that it didn't pop the balloon is probably for me. That was the point when.
I believe Anthony Elanga also started that game. Just to touch on him, him in a United shirt was fantastic, but there always seemed to be like a lack of efficacy from his runs. Like he'd make a great run, but like not deliver the final ball. Has he been very, very consistent in a Forest shirt, or has it been more up and down, including his form from last season?
Yeah, so if you include last season as a whole, so that's now a season and a half for him. He has been inconsistent. So when he came in, it was as a replacement for Brennan Johnson, who we just sold to Spurs, but ultimately a cheap replacement. We sold Brennan Johnson for £47 million, and Elanga cost only £15 million. I know it's not direct maths, but it's not as to say Brennan Johnson is 3 times as good as Anthony Elanga, but you get the point. We didn't have such high expectations for him. We think about how much In the same summer, Cole Palmer, who played a similar number of Premier League games for Man City. Cole Palmer went for 14 million and Elanga 40, sorry. Elanga went for only 15. You kind of got the impression Man United had given up on him. There's nothing special there. So I think we thought he'd just be a squad player. But due to injuries and other things, he did play most of last season, but I think with only 3 or 4 goals and 7 assists. And those assists all came within a short space of time, December and January. So you're right, he was inconsistent. You can see the speed was there, but he hadn't quite got the consistent end product. And the same this season. I mentioned that Liverpool victory at the start of the season. There was Callum Hudson-Odoi with the goal there. It was Hudson-Odoi who'd finished last season in form. So of those 2 wingers, Elanga and Hudson-Odoi, the thought was that Hudson-Odoi was the future star and Elanga would just be a mid-table player. And that actually led to Elanga being out the team for 3 or 4 games in October, November. But since he's came back, so many goal involvements, I think 3 goals in a row, including in the Aston Villa game, a hat-trick of assists in the 7-0 win against Brighton last time out. So, yeah, I mean, maybe he is still a streaky player. Maybe this current run
it's a very long streak, but
won't continue to be right. It's the longest streak so far, so hopefully it is now saying a bit of consistency from Anthony Elanga.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think after the Villa game, I think there was you said he was out of the team, and the Villa game was like the turning point, and he made like comments after the game saying he knows he can do better, and he's been showing it. So here's to hoping. Who else on the Forest team has been particularly interesting? From an outside perspective, obviously Ola Aina is like begging for a big move, I think.
I mean, what I think about Ola Aina is I think unfortunately for us, I think he'll go back to Chelsea. Because, of course, in European competitions, you have to, of course, have a certain number of players that are homegrown, that are club trained. And if Chelsea keep on selling their own academy graduates, the likes of Conor Gallagher, Trevor Chalobah, they've been trying to sell for a long time. Reece James is injury hit inconsistent. Maybe they'll cut the losses on him. So I think, unfortunately, Ola Aina will return to Chelsea because they need to boost their homegrown quota for the European competitions. He lives in London, I believe, and he's just got better and better since he was at Chelsea as a young player on the fringes of Antonio Conte's title-winning team. So I fear that Aina will return to Chelsea this summer, unfortunately.
Interesting. Did not know that he still lives in London. I've seen Elanga, Hudson-Odoi, and Ola Aina have incredible like banter together. So
yeah,
perhaps
Aina and Hudson-Odoi, they can commute together back to London. So
interesting.
Yeah,
makes a lot of sense. Probably still have bucket loads of family in London from their youth days, both being at Chelsea. Let's see. Oh, this is a good question. Steve Cooper. How did we feel about his dismissal? Like, did we feel that it was justified, or because from an outside perspective, to me, it felt like there was so much love from the Forest fans, and that there was more outpourings of support than there were calling for heads. So it felt super out the blue, but
yeah, so in our first season back in the Premier League, 22-23, the rumours in the press were that there were twice where the owners wanted to sack him, but because it was our first season back, the fans sort of protested and they kept him in a job essentially. So there's once in October after a bad start to our time in the Premier League, and another time in April after we're in a bad losing streak, which he somehow managed to turn it around for. But no, so in that first season in the Premier League, he could do no wrong. It had been 23 years out the Premier League. So if we had got relegated that first season back, the fans would not have. He was getting almost no criticism on social media even. The fans appreciated the job he'd done in getting us up there in the first place, that they were willing to forgive the bad results, although he did eventually keep us up. That did change. So it was December of 2023 that he got fired. So December in our second season. So some fans turned on him 3 or 4 games in because we were still playing super defensive football in our second season in the Premier League. Others turned more slowly. But for me, I think the timing was right. you had to wait until it was over half the fan base wanting him gone. He'd always have a special place in the Forest fans' heart, even when he had that brief stint at Leicester this season. People don't hold it against him too much. But yeah, I think the timing halfway through the second season, it was clear that it was going to be, at best, another brief survival bid. And yeah, so I don't think, to put it one way, even if Cooper had kept us up last year, I don't think he had it in him to take us to that next level for challenging for Champions League this year. So yeah, we mentioned before, I was initially not sold on Nuno, but now I can see there's quite a few things why you can see that Nuno was, after all that, an upgrade on Steve Cooper, as much as we will always thank Cooper for the memories of the promotion season.
Yeah, breaking into the top half of the Premier League table is one of the hardest things that a lower level championship side can come up to the Premier League and do. We saw it last year with Vincent Kompany trying. He's still a relatively top level manager, but Burnley wanted to play football the right way and couldn't even muster an effort outside of the relegation zone. So it's an admiration to the Forest journey that you guys are in the very solidly third place, second place, and looking up at the table, not looking down. We're going to take a quick break now, and we'll discuss the FA Cup round of 16 when we come back.
Here at the Global Sports Podcast Network, we spent a lot of time selecting our delivery platform. Zencastr came out as the clear winner. With 4K video recording from your phone and AI editing that automatically removes all those ums and ahs, it's super easy to start a podcast that sounds great and is delivered efficiently. If you're ready to tell your story, check out the link in the description to learn more about Zencastr.
All right, let's start with the potential Forest fixture, which is Forest versus Ipswich Town if they beat Exeter. Thoughts on Ipswich and if they'll provide much opposition to top of the table Forest?
Yeah, I mean, so when Forest played Ipswich at home in the league, I mean, it was a close game. It was only 1-0. Ipswich had quite a bit about them. So I think we should. I mean, as we said at the start of this episode, we should beat Exeter comfortably. We should beat Ipswich at home comfortably. But I mean, you never know. It's
the magic up.
It's a couple of weeks' time, so I think it'll depend on if we've got any injuries or not. I mean, we didn't sign anybody in January at all. We spoke earlier that Forest have been more measured and more sensible in the transfer windows, but we have also been very lucky with injuries this season. So I think we shouldn't make 11 changes against Ipswich. That should be the kind of game where maybe you swap in your keeper, rotate one or two players, but ultimately you need to play a strong team. Ipswich are still in the Premier League, but still a decent team, definitely a tougher test than Exeter. I'd expect to see Forest get through it into the quarterfinals, but it is a tricky time against Ipswich.
Yeah, couple of juicy fixtures in the next round. Newcastle versus Brighton. I think two really high pressing teams. Should be an enthralling encounter. What are your thoughts on that, Stuart?
Yeah, I mean, Newcastle and Brighton are two teams who would have a good hope of winning the FA Cup. And because Brighton, they, in thanks to no small part to Forest last weekend, are maybe not going to challenge for the top 4 or top 5 in the Premier League, but they're nowhere near the relegation battle either. So I think for Brighton, they should be looking to progress and to even go on to win the cup. I think they made the semi-final under De Zerbi a couple of years ago. So that could be the thing to cement Brighton as a really established force in the Premier League. I mean, Newcastle as well. I know they're in the Carabao Cup final, but they aren't in Europe. So they still have, it's not as if they're playing two games, 3 games every week. So Newcastle and Brighton should both be looking to win the FA Cup this season. So it's very interesting, as you say, that they'll be coming up against each other in the next round.
Yeah. So Crystal Palace are about to beat Doncaster and should play Millwall in the next round. Aston Villa are going to play Cardiff at home. Preston North End are playing Burnley. So I believe Preston are still in the championship.
I think Preston are mid-table in the championship. They're always seem to finish around 12th in the championship.
I think that's our only all-championship tie. We have Bournemouth versus Wolves. Man City are going to be faced with Plymouth, who have knocked out 2 Premier League oppositions. Let's hope they make it 3 from a United perspective.
I mean, it could be. It could be.
You never know. You never know. Especially this season, City have just crumbled under every instance of pressure, which is the least City thing over the last 10 years. I think it's what City have been accused of before the Aguero moment. I remember so many times that City faltered. I think there was a 2010 or 11. There was a fourth place playoff with City and Spurs, and City lost 1-0 at home to a decent Spurs team, but that was the mindset back then.
Before they became elite, it was City-itis, as it was called, that they always messed it up. So they seem to have caught a case of City-itis this year.
Definitely
Plymouth will be up for it. Plymouth will be up for it, definitely.
Yeah, it definitely felt like the case of City's mentality. So it's been interesting to see City shift back to that sort of mentality after being so elite for so long. So hopefully, Plymouth could do something. I said it in the last round with Liverpool. It's going to be a much changed 11. And when you have belief and all 11 players are working behind the ball, you can shut up shop even against the best of teams.
Yeah, I mean, if we have to assume if City that we have really want to be focusing on the Champions League only, Man City, to save their season. I mean, let's be honest. This is a bad City season, regardless, and winning the FA Cup won't make this a good season for City. So I don't think they'll put in too strong a team against Plymouth. They'll be resting players ahead of the Champions League, assuming they've even stayed in against Real Madrid. So yeah, I think Plymouth definitely have a chance of springing a surprise at the Etihad.
Yeah. Quick touch to end the episode. Great players that are now managing clubs. I can think of a few and a couple of great ones. I don't think I've ever seen an attacker like Ruud van Nistelrooy. He came to with Leicester to United this weekend. Go on to be an amazing manager. It seems that they always come from center back or midfield because those are the players that scan the whole pitch.
If you look at the stereotype, you do think of the best managers having been either not really much of a player at all, like Rafa Benitez, Jose Mourinho, players like that, or those who have played in defensive roles like Pep Guardiola, or like I think Jurgen Klopp was a centre back as well. So players who, you're right, Xabi Alonso, of course, being a key example, someone who's played in a defensive role, in a central role, and they've seen the whole pitch and they've had time to work things out. So yeah, I think so let's link everything together. We've mentioned Plymouth. Wayne Rooney was, unfortunately, he's not going to manage again, is he? He's been pretty poor in all of his jobs. But one attacker, legendary striker who became a legendary manager, the one and only Brian Clough. I think he still holds the record for fastest to 200 career goals, something like that. Retired early with a knee injury, and of course went on to take Nottingham Forest to win 2 European Cups back-to-back, 1979, 1980. So thank you for having me on, Eshan. It's been 29 minutes. I've finally got the chance to mention Brian Clough and Forest being 2-time European champions.
Well, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that Nuno was also in Jose Mourinho's 2004 winning Champions League squad as goalkeeper.
Yeah, right? which is crazy. He was the substitute key goalkeeper, I think. Again, as you said, he was not in the action. He was not scoring the goals, but from his role as a sub-keeper, he was able to watch everything unfold ahead of him.
The only example of an attacker that I can think of is Johan Cruyff, the elite manager, and Cruyffism spread through football. So perhaps the most influential manager of all time
was an attacker. That's right. Yeah. So the average is maybe a defender, but with the few outliers of attackers, maybe able to get the way through.
Very few and far between. It's been lovely having you on, Stuart. We're just about to hit the 30-minute mark, so I think it's a good time to end it.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, no worries. It was wonderful to talk about Forest. I loved to hear your perspective, and hopefully we get to chat about it again. All right.
Yeah, anytime. Adios. Thanks, Eshan.
Every club, every day. The Global Sports Podcast Network.